Hello, I'm Mr. eTutor, your mystery tutor here at mysterytutor.com, and welcome to video module 13-1, where, by popular demand, we are going to start taking apart the ACT. Now, the first thing you need to know about the ACT is something that, frankly, a lot of ACT people will not tell you, and that is this. The ACT is a terrible test. It's really put together very badly. On top of that, the book that I'm going to recommend you get for the ACT, which is the ACT's Answer to the College Board's Official Study Guide. This official ACT book is a terrible book, which reflects the fact that the test is a terrible test. It's only got 3 tests in it to start off, and when you try to flip through it and use it, you're going to see it is almost unreadable and unusable. When you take a sample test, it's almost impossible to find where the answers are. It's awful. If you thought that you didn't like the SAT book, just wait till you get your hands on this baby, because it's even worse. So yeah, honestly, I don't have a single nice thing to say about the ACT or the people who make it, to be totally straight up with you. But we should start out by talking about the ways that the ACT is similar to the SAT, and also, of course, the ways that the two tests are different. The reason that I started all of these videos off with a discussion of the SAT was that the SAT should really be the foundation for any sort of standardized test taking that you're going to do to get into college. The easiest way to understand tests like the ACT or any of the APs or any of the subject tests or anything like that is to start by comparing them to the SAT, because the SAT is sort of the foundation for the whole thing. So with that in mind, like I said, let's start by discussing the similarities and differences between the two tests. Both tests are standardized. It is still worth noting, though, that the standardization means a lot less on the ACT than it does on the SAT. So the ACT is still only going to test certain math concepts. It's still only going to test certain grammatical concepts and things like that. But you're not going to have those same subtle, nuanced, tricky standards and things like that to notice on the ACT that we made such use out of on the SAT. So for instance, on SAT math questions, you can learn to do very subtle and smart things with the answer choices if you know how to analyze them. And by the way, if you don't, make sure you go check those videos out. But on the ACT, there's really not anything similar. There's not anything that you can rely on and apply consistently to ACT math question answer choices to help you out in the way that you can do that on the SAT. In fact, most of the people who like the ACT like it exactly because they consider it to be a more straightforward and therefore sort of a more fair kind of a test. In a certain sense, I can certainly see why that would be a good thing. But here's the way I look at it. If you actually do know the intricacies of the SAT, and most of the people who take the SAT don't know those things, then the intricacies of the SAT can actually be a good thing for you because you know how to exploit that, and the other people that you're competing with do not. On the ACT, there's not really that much to exploit, and everybody is sort of approaching it from the same starting point as far as, you know, having knowledge about the test and being able to use that. So while most people consider the ACT's straightforwardness to be a good thing, I actually think it's one of the test's major weaknesses. The major challenge on the ACT is not, like I said, any of those subtleties that appear in the design of things like the SAT. The major challenge on the ACT, frankly, is a race against the clock. The ACT has fewer sections, and the sections are longer than SAT sections, and therefore you're also going to have, of course, fewer breaks. You're going to be answering more questions in a row on the ACT than you are on the SAT, and this means things like mental fatigue are going to start to take a toll. So if you're preparing for the ACT, make sure that you do at least a couple of tests under timed conditions. And again, we're starting to get back to some of the weaknesses of this book, because this book only has 3 real ACT tests that you can use in the first place. So use them wisely. I should add, by the way, the ACT company also makes some free practice questions available online, and of course we will provide a link to those questions over at mysterytutorvault.com. So yeah, you're definitely going to want to take some timed sample ACT tests, because the timing is a real factor on the ACT in a way that it's usually not on the SAT. Even if you have timing problems on the SAT, you will probably find that the ACT timing problems are even greater. Now, one similarity that does exist between the two tests is that you can pretty much ignore the notion of order of difficulty on the ACT just as you can on the SAT. Now, this doesn't mean that there's not people out there who will tell you that order of difficulty exists on both tests. of course there are those people. There are always people around to give you bad advice if you want to listen to them. But on the ACT, just like the SAT, if you focus on things like order of difficulty or the perceived order of difficulty of individual questions, you will find yourself answering things incorrectly for no reason. So just completely throw that out and treat the last question on the ACT math section exactly the same way you would treat the last question on the SAT math section, which should be exactly the same way you treat any other question on either of those two sections. Just try to answer it, and if you can't, you can't. And if you can, fantastic. It doesn't matter that it's the last one or one in the middle or whatever. We don't care. There is one area, however, in which most people consider the ACT to be a far superior test, and that has to do with guessing. On the SAT, as you know, you'll be penalized for wrong answers. But on the ACT, there is no penalty for marking down an incorrect answer. A lot of people find that to be a much less stressful way to take the test. So, on the ACT, if you're working on a question and you can't figure out what you think the answer is, go ahead and mark something anyway. Maybe you'll be lucky. You know, it can't hurt. Finally, one last thing, and that concerns the scoring on the ACT. As we saw on the SAT, a general rule of thumb is that each individual question you answer correctly will count for roughly 10 points on the final scale, although of course, as we saw in those videos, it could be anywhere from 0 even up to 40 points sometimes. On the ACT, it's pretty much the case that every single question you answer will generally speaking count for 1 point out of the final 36. This assumes that you're somewhere near the top end of the scale, which of course is where we want to be. So when you get up there, you're going to find, roughly speaking, each question you answer correctly gets you one more final point in the scale for that section. That's pretty much it as far as the basics are concerned. Remember, the foundation for good ACT taking is at least a basic familiarity with the SAT. So if you haven't seen any of the SAT videos or taken a practice SAT or anything, go give those a shot. Meanwhile, we'll move on and start talking about the ACT English section, which is roughly similar to the SAT writing section, in the next module. So thanks very much for watching, and remember, it's easier than you think. And in the case of the ACT, also stupider and more poorly designed than you would think. See you then.